Welcome back to another edition of the Talking National League podcast, episode 17 it is tonight. And as we are heading into game week 10, there'd be no other better time to bring on BT Sport's very own commentator, Adam Summerton. Adam, firstly, how are you doing?
I'm good, yeah. Just back from the gym, so I've had a couple of hours away from the prep. We've got a live game this weekend, so yeah, I'm really good. Thanks. Are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Maybe not on the football side of things of how Halifax are playing at the moment. We will talk a little bit about them later on in the episode. But yeah, firstly, I think what's quite interesting when I look at you as a commentator, you don't just cover the National League, you cover the Serie A, you cover the WSL, you cover a lot of leagues. How does that come about, and how have you become so invested in, for example, the Serie A? Because I know that's something that you're quite passionate about.
Well, with Serie A, I suppose that goes back to when I was probably a similar age to you, when I used to watch Football Italia on Channel 4, and then I've ended up lucky enough that I'm able to commentate on it now. So, yeah, that's something that goes back to my much younger days, and then when BT Sport got the rights. I suppose what I do with any league, any game that I cover is I try and sort of invest myself in it as much as anything, because I think that whether you're covering the Champions League, the Premier League, Serie A, National League, WSL, whatever it is, at the end of the day, it's a football match. And it's a football match that matters a great deal to the people who are involved in it and the people who are watching it with as fans. So I think that you have to embrace that and you have to invest yourself in it, because you wouldn't be doing your job otherwise, really. So, yeah, I think I'm just passionate about football, really. It doesn't matter massively what it is. I just really enjoy football, really enjoy my job. And I suppose in terms of the competitions that I cover, that's partly dictated by the companies that I work for and the rights that they may have at that given time. So there's lots of factors, really, but I've always been someone who I try to be quite versatile in what I cover, try to have a fairly broad knowledge of lots of different leagues and lots of competitions and lots of different players. I just think it's important, not just in terms of your knowledge of different competitions, but also your versatility as a broadcaster as well, be able to turn your hand not just to commentating, but I've been a radio journalist, I've been a newsreader, I've been a presenter, I've done TV, I've done radio. I think it just helps to have that sort of broad knowledge, that broad skill set, and be passionate. I think that's probably one of the most important things as well.
That's something I can back you up with. When I hear on BT Sport, there's so much passion that, you look at some of the goals, I think some of the historic moments you've commented on in the National League will be, for example, Collivan's goal against Hartlepool. That would have just been mad, watching that. Potentially even Jeff King's goal for Halifax against, I think, Torquay a few seasons ago. There's been so many moments for you as a commentator. And I think as a commentator, you have to enjoy it, don't you?
You do. I think if you don't enjoy it, you're probably in the wrong job, really. That's the great thing about doing this job, is that you're paid to do something that you love. I mean, I get to wake up every morning and I come downstairs, and more often than not, I switch on my laptop and I read about football for most of the day. So if you told me at 13 or 14 when I was at school and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, that ultimately that is what my days would consist of, and go into great stadiums, I'm very lucky. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of hard work involved as well. It isn't always easy, but it's hard work that's enjoyable, and the labours of love as well. I think that's probably the way I describe when you're doing prep. Someone asked me the other day, they said, how much do you prep for one game? And they said, is it a few hours? And I said, no, it's more like a few days. You're juggling different games all the time. Like last week I did 5 games, so you sort of you're juggling, you're sort of going from one competition to the other. And you have to manage your time very well. You have to be very disciplined in that respect. This week's a little bit calmer because it's the international break. So I've just got the 2 games this week. So it's a little bit calmer this week. But yeah, it's, as I say, to go back to your original point, if you're not passionate about it, it's not for you, really, I don't think.
Yeah, you mentioned about days preps, 5 days preps, a couple of days. I think it is also about, when I look at it, when I do, for example, my podcast, it's always about, building up your knowledge over time. Like, firstly, I was just a Halifax fan and wanted to basically talk football and talk about, the shaman. And I built my knowledge over time and noticed, I better get into the National League. And I think it is sort of about that. And, it's just enjoyable, isn't it? Just talking about a league or even a sport that you love in general, isn't it?
Yeah, I think with the National League, what I've always enjoyed is telling people the stories that a lot of stories at that level can go untold. And there's some of the best stories that I've ever come across in my career. And as I say, I mean, I'm fortunate that I cover everything from, the international football, Champions League, Premier League, and then other things like the National League, which is obviously a lower level of the game. But the stories, that some of the human interest stories you get at that level, I'm always amazed whenever I go to a National League ground as to the amount of volunteers that there are there. They're the lifeblood of the game at that level. And they've got great individual stories to tell as well. The sacrifices some of the players make who are part-time, for instance, to be able to play for a club and hold down a job as well. And then you just get stories of clubs as well. I mean, I think I've said this to a few people just recently. The Dorking Wanderers story for me is one of the best sporting stories I've ever seen, ever in anything, any sport. I think it's incredible story that deserves as wider audience as it can get, really. So I enjoy that side of covering the National League. I also enjoy the fact that, as you'll know yourself, you get to be able to spot rough diamonds in players. I've always if I hadn't done this, I think I probably would have liked to have worked in football as maybe a youth coach or something like that. I've always had an interest in that, but it's something that I can't really pursue because I just don't have the time. But if I had two lives, if I can put it that way, I would spend the other working life doing that. It's something that has always interested me, and so spotting rough diamonds and seeing them develop, and then seeing them going from the National League onto maybe even as high as the Premier League. I mean, one of the most recent ones would be someone like Sorba Thomas, who's been playing in the Championship, and Max Kilman played at that level as well. There's a whole host of players that I could name. But it's something just really satisfying about seeing young players at that level going on to bigger and better things. I enjoy that side of it as well.
Yeah, you mentioned like rough diamonds. I think another example would be Jamie Vardy. You think of Halifax now, and that's a big statement since we reformed. We've had Jamie Vardy, even Lee Gregory. You look at him at Sheffield Wednesday now, smashing it there. Players like that, Matty Pearson at Huddersfield. The list goes on, and I think Sorba Thomas is a prime example of that. What he did at Bournemouth, taking that to Huddersfield, and basically taking it on to the next step. Now I think another one, Josh Caroma as well, when he was in the National League, and I think it's such an interesting league, and I think an underrated league at the end of the day. There's a lot of people, stereotypical fans who look down at the noses at the National League and think, oh, it's a team full of plumbers, it's a team full of, people that, are just a man with his dog. I think it's the statement about the National League, and I think it's so undervalued, the National League, and people really do need to go to a game to experience it. And yes, there's a gap. For example, Dorking, Wrexham, there's a massive gap there, isn't there? But I think it's an interesting gap, and I think the stories, like you mentioned, in the National League are so significant and go such a long way. It's so interesting. I was talking to Mark at the Dorking Wanderers, I think CEO, I think you have to call him now, but about what he's done, and some of the stories that he's told me were just phenomenal. And thinking of where Dorking's come from, it's so fascinating and so interesting at this moment in time. But yeah, just another thing that I'd just like to mention. How did you personally get this, sort of educational interest in the National League?
Again, it was a case of BT Sport had the rights, and I've had the rights for a long time now. I didn't work on it initially, but an opening became available. I was asked if I would like to do a few games and see how it went. I did, and then I just went on from there, really. And I'm trying to think how many seasons I've done it for now.
I think
it's quite a lot. Yeah, at least. Yeah, it could even be more. I don't know. I'd have to count it up, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. But I do enjoy it, and I enjoy enjoy the versatility of it, in that I can have a week where I'll do a couple of Champions League games like I did last week, and then a National League game at the weekend, and then maybe an Italian game on the Sunday. So they say variety is the spice of life. I guess it doesn't really get more varied than that. But yeah, I mean, I'm doing it essentially because one of the companies I work for has the rights to it, and they asked me if I'd like to do it. So yeah, that's where it started initially. But I think you have to then develop an interest. You have to learn the league. That's very important. I think it's important that you immerse yourself in a league if you're going to be covering it regularly. It's very difficult, particularly with a league like the National League, to dip in and out. It's possible, you can do it, but I think if you're doing it most weeks, you really do start to learn the league, learn the stories, learn the players. And even for a commentator, just something that people maybe wouldn't even think about, but the sight of the players, as you commentate in that extra sort of quarter, half a second that it might take you to spot a player, you lose because you're seeing them so regularly that you become even familiar with running gaits and things like that, and haircuts and whatever. So it's easier to pick players out because of that familiarity, and that helps a commentator being able to spot people very quickly. So yeah, it's a great league to cover. I think perceptions of it have changed, hopefully in part because of the coverage that it's getting on a weekly basis. That even the leagues are directly above them don't get. I mean, Leagues 1 and League 2 are not on TV that regularly, whereas the National League is on pretty much every single week. So that helps with the exposure. It is a nearly entirely full-time league now. There are only a handful of part-time teams and some hybrid situations. So there's a real professionalism to that level of football now. And I would say that the standard is cannot be far off League 2. I mean, the evidence that you'd have for that is that teams that go up, they nearly always stay up. They very rarely come straight back down. So that would suggest to me.
Yeah. I think a surprise on that would obviously be Stockport County at this moment in time. We saw that sort of dynamic of a change in the second half of the season, and they seem to be struggling now. And I think that sort of doesn't really go with the script of what the National League's hoping to do at this moment in time, where you look at something like Sutton, Harrogate. I know Harrogate is struggling at the moment, but you look at even Barrow now, you look at them, they're all going on exceeding, and even clubs that have gone into the League One, even in the Championship, Luton being a prime example of that, just shows how hard the National League is to get out of. And I think once you've done it, it's not just like any promotion, is it? It's a feeling of, oh, we're finally, back in the Football League. Yeah. It's such a good feeling. And I know that's something I particularly had with Halifax. I think the older fans would, older Halifax fans would have that, which is you'd probably have to go back 30 years, the last time we had that promotion feeling of getting back into the Football League. But, I looked at Stockport fans and the passion. I looked at, for example, Luton fans when they got promoted, fans at, of big clubs when they, get promoted, how much it means to them. And I'm sure it'll be the same with Wrexham, Notts County, Chesterfield, all these big clubs when they can get out of the National League, making that step into the League 2. It will mean so much to them. And I think the saying does go, it is life and death football. And I think it is, especially for a lot of fans of National League clubs like Halifax, like Notts, like Aldershot, Torquay, Euroville, all these clubs, that have had history in the Football League in the past. But yeah, I think just something that I did want to move on to, just going on the National League as a whole now. We'll talk a bit about each club individually, but I think the first thing that I will ask for you, as I've got you here, Aldershot versus Halifax, not the best game for the Shaman, a 5-1 defeat to Aldershot, but I think you have to give Aldershot credit. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was a fantastic performance from them. The people who watch them more regularly than I do say it was their best performance of the season. Maybe they've been a little bit unlucky at times this season, that performances haven't always perhaps delivered the results that perhaps they deserved. There's been a sense that perhaps something's been building there, and they've got one or two new players in. I thought Whelan was excellent on Saturday, his first game. To think that he'd only joined the club, I think it was the day before. I thought he put in a really good performance. I think Amaluzor has had a really good start to the season. Ini Effiong has as well. And maybe it was just one of those days where it clicked for Aldershot. I thought they played some nice football. That said, I think at times Halifax made them look really good too, because Halifax had a lot of the ball, but they didn't really do much with it. It was all sort of side to side and up and down, but there was no real, other than that one moment for Dias Aruwe, who I thought actually was probably their best player. I thought he was the only one who came away with a great deal of credit, in my opinion. I thought he actually did quite well, but it was a worrying performance for Halifax when you consider that they'd had a really good result during the week, and it looked like maybe that would be them kicking on now, but sort of one step forward, two steps back, I suppose, in that respect for Millington. But it's still, I'm always loath to really sort of criticize too much at this stage of the season, particularly for a club like Halifax, because, it was inevitable in my thought process that they would have probably a difficult start, because so important was Pete Wild, so influential was he. The way that last season ended was such a poor way to end the season. I mean, they really should have beaten Chesterfield in the playoffs. I mean, Chesterfield limped into the playoffs. They were by far the most out of form side going into the playoffs. And it was such an opportunity missed to work so hard to get in that position and then not make the most of it. So yes, I know that there's been quite a lot of change in the squad, but those who remain, perhaps there might have been a bit of a hangover. So you add those things together, the fact that there are new players who are still bedding in. I suppose it isn't too much of a surprise that they've not absolutely, hit the ground running at the start of the season. What does surprise me is the level to which they haven't hit the ground running, if that makes sense. They've been, by and large, they've not been great, really. And I would have expected them to be sort of in touching distance of the playoff positions right now. And that's not quite the case, is it?
No, it certainly isn't. And I think last season was our opportunity. And at the end of the day, as the saying goes, we did bottle it because, third for the majority of the second half of the season, weren't we? We were probably the most consistent side throughout the season, between second, third, even first at some point within the season. And, even the back end of the season, apologies, but we were playing well for the back end of the season as well until, that game against Aldershot, in fact, who we recently played, where they got a late equalise, and then going into Stockport there was a lot of pressure, and Solihull managed to clinch that semi-final position where you're already in the semi-final basically. And we played Chesterfield, and there was always this feeling prior to kick-off within Halifax fans, we never get anything. We never get anything in this in this league. You can just see it now at the end of the game. It won't be our day because we don't, and I think we did blow it at the end of the day. Chesterfield didn't really have any expectations going into that game at all, just thinking, look, we know next season we'll probably be very strong. We'll bring in Paul Cook will be able to bring in a load of new players, his own players, in fact. So let's just take this opportunity and just see what happens with these playoffs and just hope for the best. Where Halifax, there was so much pressure on that game. We basically had to win, and I feel like it is a missed opportunity now, because if we did beat Chesterfield, Solihull away, it's a winnable game at the end of the day, the way we were playing. And, Wrexham even being knocked out at the end of the day of the playoffs. I think they were the one side that we were fearing the most in the playoffs, because they did the double on us last season. And then obviously in the final, having someone like Grimsby in the final, you'd probably, I don't know if you could say you'd expect us to win, but based off, we took 4 points off him last season, a point away, a win at home. It is a missed opportunity in my eyes, and we can sort of see now that sort of downfall, that sort of spiral of us moving down the league now. And I think it is a bit like we're back to reality at the end of the day. We've had 3 very good seasons, and now it's time to sort of regroup. And a new manager in charge probably hasn't gone to plan and been that fairy tale which we was probably hoping for and praying for at first.
I think what I would say about Halifax, and Adam and I said this in the commentary, is that, and it was one of the reasons that the performance at the weekend surprised me so much, is because this isn't a young, inexperienced squad. They've actually brought in, as the manager said himself to his credit before the game, he said, look, I've got a really good squad here. Very often managers will play down the strength of their squads, partly because they want more. No manager ever will turn down a new signing. They all want bigger budgets. But it also puts pressure on them if they come out and they say, look, I know I've got a good squad and I want to repay the faith that the chairman and the fans are showing in me. And that's exactly what he said. I thought he was very honest in that respect. And it was unfortunate for him that the next performance was as poor as it was. But you look through the squad and the players that they've signed, they have signed experience. You look at that was just about what I was about to say. You've got players there like Minahan and Keane, who won the title last season. I know Stott was out on loan, wasn't he? I think he was at Fylde last season, wasn't he? Not actually at Stockport, but title winners. I really like Spence. I think he's a player who could go on to bigger and better things. So he's a good player. I'd read a lot of good things about Harker, but he wasn't on his own in not having a great game the other day. Only really Diasaruwe did, but I'd like to, once he's settled in, I'd like to see how he does. I thought Capello showed glimpses that he could be decent. So I still wouldn't write this season off from a Halifax perspective, because when I look at the squad, I feel that there is good enough quality and good enough depth there that there is the possibility that they could go on a run. And we all know that at this level, any form of consistency will find you firing up the table quite quickly, as we saw when Stockport won the league. So I wouldn't write it off completely yet. And I think it's too early to write a manager off who's only just really come into the job. I think he needs a bit more time yet.
Yeah, I know a lot of fans are, calling his name at the moment, probably me included at the moment, just based on how we're playing, because we're desperate to get up that table. But look at the sort of the infrastructure of players that we brought in the summer, the calibre of players, Sam Minihan, Jordan Keane, Festus Arth also came in from Hull City, and he's meant to be, a future star, I think, for Hull City, and didn't really turn out there, but we were expecting big things from him, and just sort of hasn't gone to plan. And I think having players like Warburton not fully fit at the moment, Keane Spencer's only just come back, we are struggling, and I think the only negative thing is the way we're playing football. He isn't really that sort of spark, and the only player that, like you've mentioned, on Saturday that showed glimpses of, driving forward with the ball was probably Angelo Capello, and obviously Manny Disariwe in the box. But yeah, it just doesn't feel like it's gone to plan. And I think what is more concerning as well is how heavily we rely on Jesse Debra at centre half. He's a player that was heavily rumoured with Huddersfield Town in the summer, leaving to join them, and we were so fortunate to keep him. And you don't usually get that with Halifax. Usually when a player is sniffed up by a side in a higher division, they're going to end up leaving, and we've managed to keep him somehow. And we are heavily relying on him. You can sort of see the star players seem to be players from the previous season, which is also concerning. The players that have been brought in, have they really proven to me yet that they are replacing the players from the previous season? No. And that's probably what is concerning from my point of view. But we will move on to another team just to talk a little bit about now. So as we were on the topic of Aldershot versus Halifax, I think we'll do it in alphabetical order. Aldershot Town then, quite a mixed start. There's been a lot of, I think, issues off the field there. I think there's been fans, calling the board. There seems to be a massive divide between the board and the fans. They're complaining about their attendances. They were, I think a lot of people put them in the relegation zone at the start of the season just based off the previous season. What's your take on them then? Because they've been very inconsistent, but I think when you look at the scheme of things and the teams that they have beaten, you have to say it's been a fairly decent start for them.
Yeah, there has been a bit of unrest there. It's easy to forget that Aldershot were in the playoffs 2 seasons running not that long ago, and we're knocking on the door in terms of the Football League, and they've slipped a long way since then. I think I do like Mark Molesley. I like his interviews as well. I think he's a really interesting guy to listen to. The thing that I noticed in my prep for that game was the amount of players that he's brought, that he's known from elsewhere, that he's known from Bournemouth, that he's known from Weymouth, and players who talked a lot about his coaching, his man management, and players who seem to really love working under him. And I think that could stand him in quite good stead. He's got a lot of players there who respect him. Yes, he hasn't got the biggest of budgets to work with. It isn't going to be easy. If they were to finish mid-table, I would suggest, I don't know whether Aldershot fans would agree with this, but I would suggest that would be a good season when you consider the squad that they've got, the budget that they've got, the expectations, the clubs that would be competing with. I think, and the start that they made, I think that would be good. I think the last three performances have been pretty good, really. I mean, they beat Barnett 3-1 at home, and I know they lost 2-0 away at Notts, but they started that game pretty well. They did well in the first half, and any team, I think, will be able to go away and lose at Notts. They're a good side. For this level, they're a good team, so I don't think there's any shame in losing there. And then, as we say, they were excellent against Halifax at the weekend. There were times where maybe Halifax made them perhaps look a little bit better than they probably are, but it was a very impressive performance. Any game you win 5-1, you've got to take a lot of credit for that. So I think in summary, I would say that I would tend to agree that whilst I can understand why there have been murmurings up until the last few weeks, I do get the impression now that they'll probably push on, and if they can achieve a mid-table season and get something to build on going forward, for me, that would be a good campaign for them.
Yeah, I think it is about stability at that club, just based off the previous couple of seasons for them. And just going a bit back, I know I keep repeating myself on Halifax here, but some of those goals that we conceded were criminal goals. I think the fourth goal, was that the one where it basically cut us open? It might have been the third, in fact.
The pass right through the middle. Yeah,
and it was just we've seen that before. But I think players for me that are just stars for them and seem to be shining at them is probably, you have to say, Ryan Glover seemed to do very well. I'm a loser, I think it is, on the side. And then obviously having in the Effing Young, I think that was the marquee signing for me. Quite a big statement. I thought when I saw how Aldershot managed to get hold of him, I thought that was,
his 20th club.
Yeah, no, and he seems to do well a majority of the clubs he's been. I know he has been a bit inconsistent, but Woking did well. Like, he were quite highly rated at Dover as well. Not the best time at Notts, but yeah, Innie Effingham, that forward line seems set, and I think defensively they are getting a lot stronger now, based off that Halifax game.
Yeah,
and I think the thing that I have to say is, although they didn't have as much of the ball, they were so direct with the play, and it was quite entertaining if you was an Aldershot fan to watch. Every time they got the ball, they was always looking forward. They were sitting off Halifax because Halifax weren't doing anything with the ball. But when Aldershot did get hold of the ball, when they had that opportunity, they'd just cut open our defence. And if they keep doing that in the majority of the games, yes, they're going to have harder games and that. But if they keep doing that, you don't know where they could end up finishing come the end of the season. But I think it is just about consistency, and I think you mentioned it as well. Getting a bit of momentum going, getting a bit of a run going. If that's possible, Aldershot could go on to do better things this season. But yeah, the next club, it's not as positive at the moment. Oldham FC, I think there were quite a lot of high aspirations for them. They currently sit 24th in the league, 5 draws, 4 defeats. The only side not to have got a win yet this season. Going into the full-time module, I think there were quite a lot big hopes for them. What's your take on them so far?
Well, I mean, there's no dressing up that it's been an extremely difficult start. I mean, I think I'm right in saying they haven't won a game yet this season in the National League. So, 9 matches in, that's got to be quite worrying. The one thing I'd say about Altrincham that I've noted in the last few years is that they're clearly a club with ambition, which is backed up by the fact that you say that there's been this plan to go to the full-time model. It isn't always easy to do that. My experience of covering this league for a number of years would tell me is that it can be quite disruptive because a lot of players actually want to be part-time. They want to be part-time because it means they can earn more money, because they can do a job. They can do a job and get paid to be a footballer as well. So it can take a bit of a readjustment process. Now, whether that has contributed to the situation we have here, I don't know. I'd have to speak to the people at the club to get more of an insight into that. But that sort of transition isn't traditionally easy. They would, that said, still have expected to start the season better than they have done now. I don't think there's any doubt about that. To have not won it after 9 games, I mean, it's got to be, there's got to be a real worry in there. It's going to be, if they can survive this season, particularly in light of the ambition that they've shown, it's imperative, isn't it, for a club that's in that position, that if they are to kick on and they're to build and they are to maintain their ambition going forward, that they really do need to stay up. So there's a degree of pressure there as well.
Yeah, this certainly is, and I think I think a lot of people was hoping, Altrincham fans, in fact, were hoping that this season would be the season where they take it on to that next stage. They've always, probably in recent years, been known as a lower sort of National League side, just wanting to survive in this division. And I think they had that aspiration of, we need to move on to the next step now. We need to potentially, finish higher mid-table, go for the playoffs, in fact. And I think with the calibre of players that they brought in, I think there was part of that sort of expectation, I think I'd probably agree with. But yeah, quite an interesting statistic from them is they're the third side that's had the most possession in the league, 55% possession. Dribbling wise, directness, they've been very good as well. The top, in fact, of that, which is quite surprising as well, where they finished. I think it is sort of just a matter of time before they get that first victory, and maybe it is a bit about confidence. I was speaking to the captain, Jordan Hume, a couple of weeks ago, and he were mentioning that they shouldn't really be in this position. They are in a false position, and that was the first thing he said on the interview. And I think that sort of struck a light to me that potentially they are, in a false position at the moment. And it is about getting that first one in. They can build momentum from that. But yeah, the next team that we'll talk a little bit about, I believe it is Barnett FC. Had a magnificent start, dropped off a bit, and then got a very good point at Solihull Moors. What's your take on them?
Yeah, it was a good start. It's been a little bit up and down since, hasn't it? I was really impressed with them when we did the live game. I think was it 2 or 3 weeks ago now?
Yeah.
It's I thought they looked really good. The one thing I said to Adam in the commentary, I remember saying, was that it was the most cohesive Barnet side I've seen for years, because the last few years that we've seen them, and it's just been chaos there, partly because of so much managerial change, which never helps in terms of stability naturally, but they just look like a group of players who just sort of been thrown together. And I suppose in some ways that's actually really what they were, because they were using so many players, but you could see that there was a plan. You could see that there was a way of trying to play, that there was that there was a buy-in from the players and in terms of the head coach as well, which doesn't surprise me because I think he's a really good manager. He's proven that at the level below as well. I think Barnett are in a pretty good place. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they are. I think they might just end up just outside the playoffs, but I think there is the chance if they had a really good season that they could sneak into them. And that, for me, when you consider the seasons that have preceded it, would be an excellent campaign for Barnet. There's a lot to like about them. I like the way that they play. And I think overall, whilst yes, in recent weeks it has been a bit up and down, largely positive start to the season, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with you totally on that. And I think it was about this season, finishing higher mid-table. A lot of Barnet fans wanted that sort of stability as well, just based off the previous season. And we've got to remember, if it wasn't for COVID, they would be in the National League South potentially now at this moment in time. And I think it's been such a turnaround under Dean Brennan this season. And yes, it's still early, but signs are very positive at Barnet at this moment in time. And there's always that shock, isn't the other side that gets in the playoffs. Last season, it was potentially Halifax, who weren't really expected, where this season, it could be Barnet that side. I don't know, Barnet fans might disagree with me on them being the shock, but for me, they would be the shock side that could potentially finish in those playoff positions. I think the next side is, in fact, Boreham Wood. And they had a very strong start to the season. Luke Garrard, he's a likeable manager. He's, a highly rated manager at this level, especially for his age as well. And they seem to be doing very well at the moment, don't they?
Well, the one thing that you always know with Boreham Wood is that they're likely not to concede many goals. He's very good on the organisational side of the game. Luke, I know that he's very keen on working on set pieces, both in terms of scoring from them and defending them, which is something that, again, that Adam and I discussed in the game at the weekend, the Aldershot Halifax game, where I remember us saying how important set pieces are at this level, particularly defending them. And I had about a 10-minute conversation with him when he was a pundit with us at one of the Wrexham games at the end of last season, and we had a good chat about that side of things. So I know that's something that he works on a lot. He's a very bright young manager. Boreham Wood supporters won't thank me, but I'm surprised that he hasn't left yet and gone to the Football League, I have to say, because I really do rate him. But he seems very loyal to the club, and he wants to stay there, and he wants to be, it would seem, if he's going to become a Football League manager, he seems to want to do it with Boreham Wood, and they're giving themselves a chance. And I think you've got to give them credit when you consider that they've got one off, if not the lowest average gates in the league.
Yeah.
To be doing what they're doing, which is, last season, if they'd not had that FA Cup run, people forget they were challenging for the title last season. I think the FA Cup run maybe took their eye off it a little bit, and they ended up really, they just didn't have any deep enough squad to cope in the end, and injuries caught up with them in the title promotion challenge, completely and utterly fizzled out. But it's a good squad. It's an experienced squad as well. And there's quality in there too. I mean, a lot of the players who did so well for them last season are still there. They've added some others as well. I think Boreham would reinvent quite well. There's always one or two move on every year. You mentioned Sorba Thomas earlier. There've been plenty of others that have moved on over the years as well, and they do recruit very well. And I think again that's partly down to Luke. But they're in with a shout at the playoffs. I think my own opinion is I think the title would be too much. I don't think that they've got enough to go and win the league, but I do think that they've got enough to be in the playoffs, absolutely. And they've got experience of doing that before under him, and a lot of those players that he has with them right now have been there and done it in terms of getting into the playoffs too, so they know how to get that far.
Yeah, certainly. I totally agree with everything you've said there. And, talking about them being tight defensively, they've always been known as being very tight defensively and potentially nicking a game 1-0, 2-0. They're a side that frustrate me as a fan. I think a lot of clubs, for example, last season at home when Halifax played them, they just basically did a job on us when they came to the Shea. We were probably just edged it based off possession and all those sort of statistics, shots and stuff, but they defended for their lives. And, caught us out when we were most vulnerable at the back end of the first half. So, yeah, I think Bournemouth, you always know that they're going to be up there, especially under Luke Garrard. And I think now it does also look like they're a lot stronger in their forward front too, based off the new signings, including Danny Elliott as well, who came in from, I think it was Boston as well. I think he's had quite an impressive start too. But the next team that we will talk a bit about, Bromley then, they always seem to be quite a hard team to beat as a Halifax fan. They were sort of sad that could beat anybody in this league. We saw that in the FA Trophy final last season against Wrexham. Andy Woodman, a highly rated manager. There was always rumours of him leaving to go to Gillingham, but 7th place at the moment, 5 wins, 1 draw and 3 defeats. What's your take on them?
Well, I was intrigued at the start of the season by them signing Marriott because, of course, Cheek has been one of the most consistent centre forwards at this level for so long. I mean, the number of seasons that he's got into double figures in the National League is incredible, really. I'm interested to see how that develops. I know that Marriott he's played 5 games and got 4 goals. Cheek has not been maybe in terms of goal scoring to his usual level, 2 in 9. So that's something to keep an eye on from them. You're right to mention Andy Woodman in terms of just coming off the back of talking about Luke Garrard and being linked with Football League jobs. We saw very much the same with Andy Woodman last season. I just wonder with Bromley in terms of the motivation factor, how they are as a group. I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question, but you look at it and you think, well, they won the FA Trophy last season. And I suppose if you look at it from a Bromley perspective, it's hard, isn't it, for them? It's hard to sort of better that, really, because they haven't got the squad and they haven't got the resources, in my opinion, to compete with big ex-Football League clubs like Chesterfield, Wrexham, Notts County to go on and win the league when you have to finish it in the top spot to get automatically promoted. So I suppose, they're looking at trying to finish in the playoffs, but that FA Trophy win last season must have been absolutely huge for that football club when you think how long they've chased that bit of success. And I know that they'd had that promotion several years ago, but to win that piece of silverware, it must have meant so much to them. I just wonder, from a motivational perspective, how they will do this season. They've been, we talk about some sides being up and down, that they have very much been up and down, haven't they? A win here, a loss there, another win here, another loss there. It's toed and froed in that respect. But I know they beat Maidstone 3-0 in their last game, didn't they? But lost to newly promoted York directly before that. So I suppose if I were to assess where I would expect them to be, they're about where I would think, maybe slightly better, actually. Maybe just slightly outside the playoffs, just in them is where I would think they would probably end up.
Yeah, they're always a side. They're a bit like Bournemouth. They always sort of fizzle out at the back end of the season. I know Bournemouth last season was because of FA Trophy, FA Cup. I sort of saw that coming because of the amount of games that they had in hand. And, I think that sort of, I don't think caught up to them, but I think the fact that, you have to play those games, on Tuesday nights, fitness-wise, it's not always good. And I think they've always had quite a fairly small squad, and that sort of caught up with them last season in my eyes. I think the next team is, in fact, Chesterfield FC then. Top of the league at the moment, doing very well. Chesterfield, Wrexham and Notts are the 3 favourites. I think you might even throw Solihull in the equation. But yeah, it's been a very good start, hasn't it, for Paul Cook's team?
It has, because to go back to the Halifax eliminator at the end of last season, I was recording a podcast with a Chesterfield fan at the start of the season, and he and I were talking about that game, and we said, can you imagine if Chesterfield's season had finished on that Halifax game, as in they'd gone to the Shea and got beat 2 or 3-0, what the perception would have been of Paul Cook and what the perception would be going forward? I suspect a lot of Chesterfield fans, in light of their end to the regular season, would have been pretty downbeat on Paul Cook. It was he inherited a terribly difficult situation, don't get me wrong, but they really did limp over the line into the playoffs. So that victory for me against Halifax was so important for them, not going forward into this season. It would have given them, even though they went and then lost at Solihull, I think it would have given them a little bit of a platform to build on this season. And that's exactly what's happened. They've made some good signings as well. They've got Shimanga back fit. Dobra, I think, is a really good player. I really like him. I think he could be, if he can keep fit, could be one of the players of the season in the National League. Banks coming back to the club is a big factor. He was a very popular player. Returning to the club has started the season very well and looks like he could be very influential. They seem to have settled now on a more a tactical approach, which I think was a big problem once Paul Cook came in, because he was trying to play in a way to begin with that wasn't maybe natural to him to fit with how the players had been playing under James Rowe. And I think now this just feels a little bit more like Paul Cook's team. And the results are there for all to see, aren't they? They're top of the league.
Yeah.
I know they had that draw against Euroville, which they'll be disappointed with, but they'd had a long winning run before that. And I don't see any reason why they can't challenge for the title when you look at the squad and you look at the manager that they've got and the fact that they've got the best centre forward in the league. If he stays fit, Tshimanga, he is, in my opinion, still the best centre forward at that level, although there's a lot of competition.
Yeah, there certainly is at this moment. But yeah, I think that's another factor. Last season, I always had that feeling, I think a lot of fans did. If Tshimanga got injured, would they suffer significantly? Which you probably would with any striker that's as prolific as him, because I think he was projected 40 goals. It was something stupid like that when he got injured. He was basically an animal at this level, wasn't he, last season? And I think this season, the thing is about Tshimanga this season, they haven't actually relied on him heavily. If you think about it, I don't actually believe
it's true.
He started a game and they're still top of the league. So imagine when he's fully fit, which he probably is at this moment in time, and starts getting in the team. Where will they be, in the upcoming weeks? However, you look at, we will move on to Wrexham in a little while, but look at Wrexham second, chasing them down. It's just so unpredictable, isn't it, this league in total?
But that's one of the things that I should have said earlier, that the unpredictability of it is one of the reasons we love it so much.
Yeah, Dagenham then, the next team. They're another side, I think quite similar to Halifax, had quite high expectations this season. I think everyone was expecting Dagenham, right? It's the time now for them to really, break into these playoffs on a consistent basis, and in the upcoming seasons get back to the Football League. And they haven't done that, which is quite surprising. You're looking at them at the moment, they currently sit 13th in the league, which is quite flattering compared to where they were about 2 weeks ago after just beating a struggling Oldham side.
Very disappointing, really. I think that I've met Daryl a few times, I've worked with him, and I know that he's an ambitious guy. He's a very good coach, and I know he'll be disappointed with the start that they've made, because you're right. I mean, people looked at them and they thought pre-season, I did anyway, and I looked at it and I thought Dagenham and Redbridge will be there or thereabouts this season in terms of the playoffs. I didn't think they'd go and challenge for the title, but certainly for the playoffs. And they had those really heavy beatings recently against Notts and Wrexham, didn't they? I suppose to their credit, they've gone and beaten Altrincham, but how much do we read into that with the start that Altrincham have made? They've got, in my opinion, I think still one of the best centre forwards in the league in McCallum, certainly one of the most natural finishers at this level. And you look at their squad, and I still think, despite the start that they've made, that their target should still be to be finishing in the playoff places. And I repeat what I said earlier to you about the fact that at this level, consistency is so hard to come by, that when sides do find it, you can shoot up the table so quickly. So I wouldn't totally despair from a Daggers perspective, but there's no doubt that so far they've underperformed. I don't think anybody could deny that.
Yeah, certainly. I know they've been expected goals against a total of 17, which is actually the fourth worst in the division, which is quite concerning for me if I was a Dagenham fan myself. But yeah, they do need to start shooting up the table very soon. I think potentially something that could happen is a managerial change in the upcoming weeks if results don't go their way. That could potentially be that sort of turning point, which they may need. I think the next club is, in fact, Dorking Wanderers. They currently sit 11th in the league. Like we've talked about, what a story they've had so far, but they've been very inconsistent. They're the sort of side for me that could beat anybody in this division on their day, but could also lose to anybody.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. I mean, we watched them when they went to Oldham, which was just such a fantastic fixture so early on in the season, when you think you've got the first club that have been relegated from the Premier League to play in the National League against Dorking, whose story, as we've already commented on, is one of the, in my opinion, one of the greatest sporting stories I've ever read. Just remarkable that it was even a football fixture, really. But they just looked in the very early weeks, and maybe up until very recently, and a bit of I don't know if naive's a fair word, but certainly there was a lack of balance between attack and defense. The balance wasn't right. They were too open at times. And whilst you were always confident that they would score plenty of goals, I was also very confident that they would concede them. And then they got that hammering, didn't they, at home against Wrexham, where they got beat 5-0 on the 3rd of September. And there was that interview, I think it was after that game, where Mark White really laid his cards on the table and put out a big warning to some players and said, look, I look at this squad and I think that I've got players here, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is not a quote, where he basically said, I'm not sure they're good enough. And if they're not good enough, they won't be here any longer. He was very very to the point, very matter of fact, and it was a big warning to the group that they needed to sort themselves out. And I think, since then, defensively, you've got to say that the last two games they've been much better. A clean sheet against Barnett, away at Barnett, which is a really impressive result when you consider the start that Barnett have made, particularly to keep us a clean sheet. And then they go and beat one of the favourites for the title in Notts County, and I think they came from behind to do that as well. So, look, for them to stay up this season would be fantastic when you consider their background, their budgets, their first season at this level. But it looks like they could push for they're mid-table at the minute. Who knows what's achieved? He's just with that football club. Who knows? I mean, they're just so remarkable. But
he said to me, Mark, that his aim and the story would be to get them back in the Football League in the upcoming years, which is such a statement.
Well, I mean, with what he's already done, Luke, I wouldn't back against him doing that, because he looks like the type of guy that when he says something, he means it, and he'll give absolutely everything to try and achieve it. So I think that's a very powerful force in life and in sport. So I wouldn't be surprised if that does eventually happen. I don't think it's going to happen this season. It's a level that is not easy to play at and to adjust playing at. But McShane, what a start to the season he's had. I mean, if they keep hold of him in beyond the new year, they'll do very well. I would imagine there'll be Football League clubs looking at him, and one or two others as well. But I think overall, yes, there've been big concerns defensively. They've conceded way too many goals. But to look at their position in the table, considering where they've come from, I think they've got to be reasonably happy with that. Certainly the last two games there've been real signs of encouragement.
Yeah, I think the next team is Eastleigh. They're another side. Had a flying start to the season. Defeat on the opening game to Wrexham, yes, but I think it was just an Elliot Lee masterclass, and I don't think any side could really have argued with that. But yeah, they've had a very good start compared to the last couple of other seasons. I know I talk about this with a lot of clubs, but I think it was about stability for them. But I think now you're probably be trying to aim a little higher up the table than what they are at the moment. What's your take on them?
Yeah, I mean, Eastleigh are a side who, in years gone by, had an awful lot of investment into the club. They were paying some very high wages, and obviously that changed when the owner left for Sunderland. They're run very differently now, a lot more prudently. They're a club that I think maybe punched above their weight a little bit as well in recent years when you consider their budget. I look at them and I think if they could finish anywhere near the playoffs, that would be a really good season. I would expect them to end up kind of mid-table, really. That's my honest assessment of the squad, of where they were, of where they are. Recent results haven't been good. They've lost 3 of their last 4. But when we've covered them live, I've seen, they have got good players. It is so competitive now at this level that you don't really look at any squad and you go, oh, they're terrible. They're really going to struggle.
Even Scunthorpe, they weren't that bad against us.
No, not at all. So it's a really competitive level, and you can have good players, but yet still be sort of mid-table. It's not really that much of a slight to say that this is probably a National League mid-table club. I don't see them getting in the playoffs, if I'm honest, this season. I think that would be a bit of a push, but at the same time, I don't see them fighting relegation either. I expect a mid-table finish from them.
Yeah, I'd probably be expecting that from my perspective anyway. But yeah, Gateshead, when they came to Halifax, they looked a very good footballing side, and I think they have done in a lot of games. But I think the main aim, and I think it is at the end of the day, they were pawing both boxes at the end of the day against Halifax. What's your take on them? 22nd in the league at the moment.
Yeah, maybe finding it a little bit difficult to readjust back to this level, which isn't too much of a surprise. I felt for them over the summer because they just lost so many goals with the pair that went to Notts County and look in the part there as well, particularly Langstaff. I mean, what a player. He looks at National League level. It's hard, to lose that many goals. And then just be able to readjust, particularly when you're a newly promoted team. So it may well take them a little bit of time. Their style of football is, and I'm looking forward to watching them at the weekend because we're covering them at Maidenhead. I'm looking forward to watching that, to see their style of football, because I've had nice reports about the way that they look to try and play. But there are times at this level where you're not able to do that. You're not able to play stuff that's easy on the eye. Maybe you do have to be mix it up a little bit. I thought that at the weekend about Halifax. I think I said it on air, actually. There were just times when I looked at it and I thought the side-to-side stuff isn't working. You've got a 6'5" centre forward, stick it in the box a bit more regularly. And maybe fans don't want to see that, but I just felt there were times when they could have mixed it up a bit more. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, so it's not been an easy start for Gateshead, but you look at their setup, their squads, and I'd be pretty confident that they'll stay up, but it won't be easy.
Yeah, it certainly won't. And I actually predict them in the relegation zone. But I think what's surprising for me is you look at Altrincham, Scunthorpe, Gateshead, they've all had quite high possession stats in this division so far. Halifax as well, just above them. And that seems to be quite an interesting statistic. Usually sides who have a lot of the ball seem to do well, and that seems to be quite different this season, despite obviously Notts County, Wrexham and Chesterfield, who've had a lot of the ball, who'd expect to have a lot of the ball. But yeah, I think the next team is in fact Maiden United. Like you mentioned, they're playing Gateshead on Saturday. What's your take of them? I think they're always written off before the season's even started, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, yeah. Every single year, and Alan Devonshire always takes great pleasure in proving everybody wrong. I remember Adam Virgo predicted that they would go down one year, and he couldn't wait, Alan, to when they were pulled clear, to speak to Adam and say, "What did you say about us?" Which I quite liked, actually. I like that personality side of things. And they've had a difficult run recently that they ended with a win over Woking in their last game, which they really needed. Yeah, they're a club again who, what do people expect, really? I mean, the budget is one of the smallest in the league, and he's always having to be creative, Alan. It's not easy to do that at this level of football where it is so competitive. But he manages somehow every year to find a way to get them safe. And I suspect they're probably in for another very similar season. I don't expect them to be anywhere near challenging for promotion. And if he can get them safe, that will be a pretty good season. I like the way that Alan's always developed players as well. I mean, we talk about rough diamonds. We've seen several who've been under his tutelage go on and play in the Football League. And I like that about Maidenhead as well, that they do look to produce players. They do look to push players on if they at all can. Who was the centre forward they had last season? Kelly.
Right. Oh, yeah, Kelly's gone to Solihull, hasn't he?
Yeah, I really liked him last season. I know he's not yet gone to the Football League, but he's the type of player that he came through their youth system. I think he's got it in him to go and play in the Football League. I'm surprised he hasn't been given a chance to do that already. So I like that about Maidenhead. But in terms of what they'll do this season, I suspect that with his track record, Alan will get them safe. Anything sort of above lower mid-table would be a good season, in my opinion, when I look at the resources and the squad that he's got to work with.
When I was actually predicting and doing my predictions, and I thought this season it's that competitive at the bottom of the table as well as the top, I thought that the sides that are part-time, Wealdstone, Maidstone, potentially Altrincham, it'd start catching up to them, which it sort of hasn't so far this season, despite obviously Altrincham, who are struggling. I think they were the one side that I did actually predict to survive this season. Obviously, they're not. They have gone into the full-time module now, but Maidenhead, for me, I put them in that relegation zone, and it was because of the significant loss of Josh Kelly. I just couldn't see them replacing him. But the next team is, in fact, another side I think a lot of sides writ off before the season even started, and that was Maidstone United. What's your take on them? 15th in the league.
I think they've got to be pretty pleased with that start overall, haven't they? I mean, as a newly promoted side, they're just above the side that we've just talked about in Maidenhead. I love Hacken Hayrettin. I don't think you'll find many people in the media and in football who don't like Hacken. Yeah, I mean, he's such a passionate guy. I don't know if you ever saw the documentary that we did on BT Sport where we followed a handful of the National League managers and looked at their day-to-day. And it really did emphasize to me, as I suppose you kind of knew anyway, but it really hammered it home how hard these guys work, how it's a 24/7. I mean, I don't know if he still does, but at the time he had his own chip shop as well that he was running. It's a real 24/7 kind of guy, and he's done really well to get them promoted. And look, if it looks like they might have ambitions beyond that now with the start that they've made. But I would suggest that if they finished above the relegation zone in their first season back at this level, that would be an excellent start. It's a nice setup there. I don't know if you've been to Maidstone there, and they, they're actually pretty well backed too in terms of their supporters. So they do. And I think it's that type of area and that type of crowd where you can build momentum. You can build a real feeling of positivity because there is such a good connection with the local public. They do get good crowds. And I think they've got an infectious character in Hakan in charge. I'm not worried at all about them. I think they'll be okay this season.
Yeah, I'm starting to rethink mine yet, but I probably will still put them in that relegation zone. But as a manager, I saw that interview he did after the Wrexham game. He actually went out and apologised to the fans after that game, which I thought was fair play to him. You've lost to a side that, to be honest, you never really expected to beat, especially away from home at Wrexham, because we know how strong they are at home. I thought, you can't really take anything from that game. For him to go out and apologise to the 200 or so fans that went, fair play to him as a manager. The next team is, in fact, Notts County. They're probably predicting not just promotion, but probably even the title they'll be wanting to go for. They currently sit fourth. The first defeat against Dorking Wanderers away. I think it's just about sort of coming the back off this defeat, what they do next now for them.
Yeah, look, Notts County are a club who shouldn't be at this level. It's a huge club for this level. The stadium could easily grace as high as the Championship without looking out of place. It's a club that really needs to get promoted, and they've had those near misses. It's been such a frustrating time. They've got stable ownership now. They've got good recruitment in place. It's a club that you just feel like everything is there, everything is in place, including a big supporter base as well for them to get promoted. But we just know how hard it is to get out of this league. But they've got to have a real good chance this season, if not automatically, certainly through the playoffs where they've been in the last few years. Langstaff looks an absolutely fantastic player, but there's so much quality, isn't there? I mean, I tip Ruben Rodriguez to be the player of the year in the National League this season. He actually says that he feels he's a better player now under Williams, the new manager, than he was last season. He feels that Williams is helping to bring his game on, but he says it's maybe in ways that the fans won't notice because his numbers are down in terms of assists and goals, but he feels his all-round game is actually getting better, which I thought was quite interesting. But there's no doubt that they have got a squad good enough that on paper should be challenging for the title, and I think they will. I would still go with Wrexham to win it, but you'd have to think that Notts County and Chesterfield in particular would surely keep them honest at the very least, if not push them all the way.
Yeah, certainly. Notts County, they are a side and sort of on the up now. They were a bit like, I know we will talk about Scunthorpe, a side that's come down to the division, and I think for them it's about consistency. That seems to be something that they're always up near the top of the table. You'll never see them ever really mid-table at the start of the season. They're always there, but they never have that run where teams sort of fear them. They're always a side that you think, Notts County, they're beatable. Them, if we catch them on a bad day, we can beat them, and that's something that they've always had. Now I think of Halifax last season, that magical game at the Shea when we beat them 3-2, 2-0 down to them with 10 men. No side, especially a side like Notts, should ever, concede, end up losing that game. Never mind even drawing that game. But yeah, that's the problem with them. And I think this season is about more consistency and keep winning, which they have done, to be fair, at the start of the season. But yeah, I think during those winter months they need to be strong. And the weakness to them for me is the lack of depth. Something that they've tried this season. They've gone for quality, not quantity. And that might be where they do fall off at the end of the day when, your Wrexhams and your Chesterfields seem stronger, especially in those winter months when you're, down on numbers, which I think even at the moment they are with certain injuries. I think the next team will be, in fact, a side that were a little more on a negative note, Scunthorpe United.
Yeah, where to start there. And it's not just where to start in terms of this season, but where to start for a number of seasons now with Scunthorpe. We all know that the issues that there are behind the scenes. I wondered whether they could end up being a bit like their local rivals Grimsby and end up being that sort of side that gets their ownership issues completely sorted out. Everything calms down and suddenly everything starts to click into gear for them. But it isn't working that way at the minute. I was really lulled into a false sense of security with Scunthorpe because we did them in their first game of the season against Euroville. I thought this looks a good side. There seemed quite a lot of positivity there. They put in a pretty good performance on the opening weekend. The new signings all seem to be settling in nicely. And then lo and behold, just weeks later, the manager's gone and disarray is setting in. And now they've only won one of their first 9 games. Obviously, it would be in a sporting capacity catastrophic for them to be relegated back to go down to the 6th tier. I mean, it's such a big club.
Yeah.
But we've seen it happen. You only need to speak to Stockport fans to tell you, to give you the history there. So they've got to be very careful. And suddenly a season where if you'd asked their supporters before the season, you'd have said, well, what's your ambitions? I think a lot of them would have said, we want to challenge for promotion. But reality is bitten very quickly for Scunthorpe as to the competitiveness of this level, and how, if you've not got your house in order, if there is any level of disarray behind the scenes, this is such an unforgiving level of football. And things can unravel very, very quickly. And we've probably seen that a bit with Scunthorpe in the early stages of this season.
Yeah, they certainly can. You know, I went to Scunthorpe away as a fan, and as we were driving in, you could see on a bridge it said Swan out, Hill out, who was currently the manager at that moment in time. And I thought, geez, things are really toxic at the moment at Scunthorpe, and that's not good. And I think the players sort of thriving off that sort of atmosphere, if you look at it, because look at the squad on paper, they should be nowhere near the bottom of the league.
I agree.
Butterfield, Whitehouse, they had that youngster, there was a youngster from called Apto as well, who were very, very good against Halifax. I think, what's that striker called? Natalo, I think it is, up front, and he looked very...
They've got some good players.
Yeah, they have, and I think that's what surprises me. And at the start, before I first did a podcast about it, before they'd signed any players, I said they could struggle this season. After they brought in those players, I was expecting them to do a lot better, mid-table perhaps, just based off the things that are going off the field. But for me, it's a bit like Southend with them. I think once they sort of get their act together, they get a bit of a run go and get that next victory, I think they will sort of glide away from that relegation zone, because, like I've said, I think Scunthorpe are a way too big side to be anywhere near the relegation zone, let alone actually being relegated from the division. The next club is another side that was relegated, Oldham Athletic. I was speaking to an Oldham fan about the sacking of John Sheridan. New manager in at the moment, recently joined them. What's your take on them?
Well, I suppose it's another case of a very big football club for this level getting a little bit maybe of a culture shock coming in to the National League. It's never an easy level to adjust to. We see that so many times, and there has been a bit of that. There's been a wave of positivity with the new ownership. That's ebbed away a bit now because results haven't been quite what they might have hoped for or expected. And that's obviously played a part in why John Sheridan has ultimately been let go. But the new owner has now got his own man in, hasn't he, in Unsworth? And that's, look, I know that he's had that caretaker time in charge at Everton. He was very well regarded for what he did in the youth system at Everton. So it's a great opportunity for him. It must be fairly close to home for him. I know that he lives up in the Northwest, spent all those years at Everton. So let's see. I mean, it's hard to know what to expect, really, because he's somebody who's completely untried, untested at this level. And this level is, as we've discussed at length, is something that does take a little bit of time to adjust to. It can surprise you. The phrase I always use is it slaps you across the face, this level of football, particularly if you've been used to the higher levels of the game, which David has. But as I say, the reports that I've had for many years is that he's a very, very capable coach. So let's see what he can do. I think he's got a squad there that's capable, if they can string results together, that's capable of trouble in the playoff places. But they've given themselves already quite a bit to do in that respect with the start that they've had to the season. Yeah.
The next club is Solihull Moors. And I will admit, I put them very high up at the start of the season, especially after that relegation from the Football League. Not relegation, sorry, that playoff defeat to Grimsby in the final. But on paper, they were a very, very strong side, especially with the additions. There was another side that kept that squad together, which is something Halifax didn't manage to do, but also add to that with quality and not just quantity. What's your take on them?
Yeah, I was surprised that the players that they kept, particularly Sabara and Dallas, I thought that they would move. There is money there. That's quite clear. And that's maybe what's kept them there. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So I think that there's ambition there too. So those two things married together are obviously going to help. They've surprised me because I thought that they would really drop off in the way that we saw Torquay drop off after they just missed out in the promotion final. So they've not quite had the hangover that I thought they would. They're a lot higher up in the table than I thought that they would be. They've certainly took me by surprise in that respect. So full credit to them. I think they're having a really good season so far. And I suppose we shouldn't be too surprised, should we? Because Ardley is a very good coach for this level of football. In my opinion, he shouldn't be at this level. He should be in the Football League. And maybe he will get there with Solihull this season, because whilst I think that the title will probably be beyond them, if I'm honest, when you look again to wheel out the names of Wrexham, Chesterfield and Notts County, I'm not quite so sure that they'll have enough to particularly Wrexham to compete with them throughout a whole season of 44 games. I do think they'll be in the playoffs again. I really do, and
I will agree.
I think they'd have another crack at the playoffs, and they'll use that experience that they had from last time.
Yeah, I actually put them to win the league, which was quite a big statement at the start of the season. Yeah, and I'm probably going to have to stick with that now because they've sort of proved me right. But I think losing to Notts County, I think that sort of was an indication for me, are they actually good enough on paper to win the league? But like you mentioned, they have got money behind them, and they've certainly done that so far this season. They look a very good side. The next side is, in fact, Southwind United. They were a side that underperformed, I think, because I think a lot of people was expecting them to have a lot stronger season after the previous season with the players they brought in. For example, Dan Mooney being a big player for them.
Yeah, I mean, before the season got going, people always tend to ask me, who do you think will be the sort of the dark horse, if you like, a club that not necessarily to go and win the league, but might get in the playoff places that you perhaps wouldn't expect. And the two names that really came to my mind were Southend and York. And I suppose in terms of York, I've been proved right a little bit there. They're having a good season, but yeah, Southend, it's not quite going again the way that I thought it would do, because I remember Adam and I, we this sort of start of last season, after they'd had that difficult start, I remember looking at who they'd brought in behind the scenes as much as who was on the pitch, and you looked at names like John Still, Stan Collymore, Darren as well, and you looked at it and you thought, oh, that's a club that's really getting its house in order behind the scenes. And you thought, particularly with John on board as well, I thought, he's somebody who's got a proven track record of bringing in players for this level of football. And I thought there were signs, weren't there, in the second half of last season as to this was a club that was going in the right direction. But that positivity seems to have sort of ebbed away yet. I haven't covered them yet this season, so I haven't seen a massive amount of them, so I won't pretend that I have. But I would have expected them to be higher than they're 17th, 9 points from 9 games. I would have expected them to have been higher than that, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, I'll agree with you on that. 8 goals scored, 9 against. I think it's been quite a poor start for them so far this season. I know a lot of people did actually predict them quite low down, which was quite surprising, but they've sort of proved, I think, myself wrong at this moment in time. The next club I do believe is, in fact, Wealdstone. What's your thoughts on them? Because they've certainly overperformed this season. Wealdstone fans are saying, I think people undervalue us as a club, underrate us as a team. What's your take on them? 6th in the league.
Well, I think they've got a point, really. I think that's true. I think people expected them to be fighting relegation. And boy, have they surprised people. And we did them in the live game recently. I really like Maynard, the manager. I think he comes across as somebody who looks as though somebody who'd get the best out of players because of the way he is. He's a good talker, which helps for TV, but he also seems very relatable. He seems to be a good communicator. And from what you read from the players and those that observe him, is a good coach as well. And you don't have the start that they've had with the resources that they've had without having a good manager, I don't think. I think that's really important. I know they've drawn a lot of games recently, but they're incredibly difficult to beat, aren't they? I think, is it just one defeat so far?
Yeah, it is the one defeat so far. Halifax was a prime example of that when we were defeated to them. We lost 1-0 and we played horrendous, but I think you have to give Wealdstone a lot of credit for that game.
Defending really well. And look, whilst the squad on paper isn't one that I would naturally look at and say, oh, they should be challenging for the playoffs. And I'm not going to pretend that I would. But having said that, there are names that you look at it there and you think, well, someone like Habergam, who's been there and won promotion from this level, you've got to take seriously. Cook is a player that I've always rated as well in terms of very capable, very solid National League level defender. I know Kinsella's not played much yet this season, but Kinsella I would very much put in that bracket as well. Kretschmar is a very capable player at this level as well. Ferguson, who they got from Southend, Brown, who's had such a good start to the season, lots of experience at this level. As a bit of a sort of a bit of X factor, a bit of somebody who perhaps will surprise a lot of people. I thought Alarakia in the live game that we did looked absolutely fantastic. Every time he got on the ball, I thought something's going to happen here. So there's players there that when you look at them, I suppose we probably shouldn't be quite as surprised as maybe we are that they are where they are.
Yeah, I think Kretschmar was a huge signing for them at the start of the season, a marquee signing, and he's sort of proven that as well. And I was like, how on how the hell have they managed to get hold of him? And I think this is another thing. They're still part-time, and something that I was looking, I think you mentioned it, they can attract the best part-time players and players that are wanting to go part-time. That's something that Wealdstone have done, and I know a lot of people are predicting them to tail away, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did, after seeing what they're actually capable of now. I actually predicted them in the relegation zone, and it was because of them being part-time. The loss of Josh Unwell, maybe that's sort of gone back in my face at this moment in time. But yeah, I think we can safely say they'll have no danger of relegation this season. The next team is, in fact, Wrexham FC. Right, there's so much to talk about, isn't there, with Wrexham? Hollywood, Paul Mullin, documentary. I've spoke to a few fans on this, and just what an unbelievable story and such a privilege for Wrexham fans themselves. Like, for me as a Halifax fan, after actually seeing what they can do now and what the owners are capable of, I couldn't imagine it happening to Halifax and what that could do to our club. But yeah, based off Wrexham, wow, what a decent start to the season, yes, but wow, it's magical, isn't it? It's an unbelievable story. It's a fairy tale.
Well, I mean, and we just illustrate here what we said earlier about how you get such different stories at this level of football. We just talked about Wealdstone, which really is a story that really excites me when you consider, their resources, where they've come from, what they're achieving with limited resources. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got a club like Wrexham, who for this level of football, let's be honest, they've pretty much got limitless resources, haven't they? They can keep throwing stuff at this until they finally go up. And that's exactly what will happen. Wrexham will eventually get promoted. It's just a matter of time. Will it be this season? Well, look, they're the favourites. I backed them to win the league, but I never was one of these people that thought that it would be finished by March, like the bookies seem to be predicting. Because the thing about this league, which is what I've learned from covering it for so many years, is the unpredictability of it is one. But another is that players tend to be at this level because they lack consistency. On their day, they're capable of playing in the Championship. As technically, they can be as good as a lot of footballers at a very high level. What separates them and players who play in the Premier League and the Championship and other top leagues is that consistency. So naturally, it's very hard for a team to have a level of consistency where they would run away with it for those reasons. So I know there's been signing players from League One and League Two, and look, they absolutely should win it, but that brings a pressure in itself. And this is a club that I think I'm right in saying this is their 15th season at this level.
That's my age.
Well, there you go. Yes, that's amazing, isn't it? So I wonder how much pressure that will bring, bearing in mind the size of the backing that they have, bearing in mind that they're fully expected to win the league. How will that, if it is tight in the final weeks of the season, how heavy will that weigh on the shoulders? All the attention that comes with a TV documentary. I just don't think it will be quite as simple as maybe some are predicting. And the early stages of the season are suggesting that they will be kept honest by the likes of Solihull, by Notts County, by Chesterfield, maybe even by Boreham Wood. And I hope that remains the case from a neutral perspective. I don't want to see a team run away with it. If Wrexham are the best side at the end of the season, good luck to them. They deserve to win the league. But I think, as I say, from a neutral perspective, I would like to see a good title race. And the signs are that we probably are going to get one, but they should win the league.
Yeah, they certainly should with the resources that they have got this moment in time. The next club is, in fact, Torquay United. They've had quite a poor season, poor start, I should say. I sort of expected this. Gary Johnson, you can't undervalue him as a coach, but we saw the players that they lost, and I think it's quite hard for them. You look at the position in the country, it's hard to keep hold of good players, and that's something that sort of suffered from. We sort of saw that with Winter obviously leaving to join Barnett. Really, would you usually see that as leave to join Barnett? No, you probably wouldn't, but it's probably because of location and accommodation issues and stuff like that. And yeah, we've always seen that problem with Torquay. Yeah, they haven't had the best start. I think they've had a lot of gamble with youngsters. 20th in the league. I have to say, when I saw them at Halifax, they did defeat us and they defended for their lives. But as a footballing side, they looked woeful. And I don't want to offend any Torquay fans here, but I'd say it's the worst Torquay side I've seen at the Share for quite a number of years, I have to admit.
Doesn't it show you how significant, 2 or 3 kicks of a football can be in terms of that penalty shootout in the promotion final? Because, if they win that penalty shootout, their whole trajectory of the club completely changes, completely different. That day was their chance. I remember Adam saying, I think it was Adam who said to me after the game, look, that was their chance. And when will another one come along? it's so difficult for Gary because we know what a fantastic manager he is. You know, his track record for the lower levels of the Football League and the National League and obviously the sixth tier as well. I mean, a guy who really knows what he's doing, but it's so hard on the budget that he has to attract the players. You've already highlighted that really. And what he's doing really is essentially trying to build a new team. And it's proving difficult, and they're not scoring enough goals. They're just not enough of a threat. I think it's you've probably got it in front of you there, but I think it's 6 goals they've got this season, which, you know, this far into the season, what we 9 games in? Yeah, 9 games in. I mean, that's just nowhere near enough, is it? You're going to have to be defending very, very well indeed, aren't you? And they're defending. They're better defensively than they are in terms of scoring goals. They've maybe got that side of things off better than scoring goals right now, but there's a lot of work to do there. And it feels to me like the type of season that if they can stay up and finish maybe lower mid-table, I feel like Gary would probably look at that and go, do you know what? With all the change that we've had, that would probably be okay. Yeah, I don't know. I've not asked his opinion, but it's very. I think it's easy to underestimate how hard a job he's got right now.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I look at Torquay supporters, and at the end of the day, I think it sort of gets shined away with like your Halifaxes, your Torquays, your Aldershots. These are fairly big clubs that are, you know, historically football league sides, and you know they're sort of further down the pecking order, and it's showing how competitive this league is. And like you mentioned, it was their opportunity at the end of the day. And from right and remember, if I do recall watching that game, they were very unfortunate with some of the decisions that were made. It must have just been mental commentating on that. But Torquay fans have said to me to not repeat that anymore. I know they've said that a few times, but that was their opportunity. And I think it is a shame for them. But the next club is Euroville Town. They currently sit a place above them. Another side that have defended very well, but they haven't really scored too many goals so far this season.
No, they haven't, but I know obviously their manager very well in Chris Hargreaves, and I think that Chris can take some positives from the start of the season. I know that, you know, people will look at it, and again, we talk about the competitiveness of this level and how such big clubs. I mean, Torquay, again, another ex-Football League club. Yeovil, it's in living memory that they were playing in the Championship. You know, this is a club that should be in the Football League. But I think I said it to him. Actually said it to him myself, actually, that in terms of budget and compared to expectation, that sort of equation, I think Chris has got one of the hardest jobs in the league, really, at Yeovil, because it's no secret that they've got a very small budget. He's got to be very creative. I think his skills as someone who's coached young players for a long time in his coaching career at Bristol Rovers, that is really going to have to come into play. He's got to maximise the potential of young players there. And he's having to, I suppose, in some ways, really cobble together a squad. So, you know, they've not been getting hammered every week. All their games have been pretty close. I know they've drawn 3 of the last 4. The one that they lost in that was only by a 0-0 against York. They had that morale-boosting win against Dagenham and Redbridge. It never, for me, was going to be a season where you look at their squads and you would think they're going to challenge for the playoffs. If they finish, and again, I seem to be saying this about quite a few teams, but if they finish lower mid-table, if they don't get sucked into the bottom 4 in the relegation battle, I think all things considered, that would be a decent season for Yeovil. Although their supporters won't want to hear that, because the supporters, and they've got every right to feel like this, that their club should be aiming for better than that. And I think that if there is a change in terms of the ambition level and the budget level, there's every possibility with their fan base that they could achieve that. But right now, with the way that the club is, I think that's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, it certainly is. I know there's been a few issues with ownership and stuff like that compared to what, you know, Yeovil fans have spoke to me. And I think appointing Chris Hargreaves obviously has been part of the BT Sport in the past. It interests me, to be honest, when I looked at that. And I thought that's quite a good decision, quite smart, because I think something new needed to happen, some sort of new sort of idea. And this seems to be it. And I think the players that they brought in, for me, I was quite interested by Ulbert being one of them as well. But I think their opportunity was that first season when they came down. They looked a very strong side and were quite unfortunate losing to Barnett in the playoffs, if I recall, that season. Now, the final side is, in fact, York City. Got promoted last season, had quite a good start to the season, currently sit 8th in the league. There was a massive amount of players that they brought in. I think, was it 13 players in total? I think it was. And
the Nottingham Forest of the National League.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. What's your take on them so far?
Well, one of the reasons, it's interesting you mentioned that, one of the reasons when I was asked for sort of dark horses for the playoffs that I picked them out even as a newly promoted team was because I looked at all those new signings, and every name that I looked past, I thought National League experience, good age. They've signed players who know the level. And that's obviously really important, as we see when clubs haven't been at this level and managers who haven't been at this level, it takes a while to adjust. So that was a really key reason for me as to why I looked at them and thought that I think they'll do okay. And they are about where, if I'm honest, I thought they would be. I thought they would be in and around the playoffs, and that's where they are. So I'm not surprised at all, really, at the start that they've made. And I expect that they will maintain it as well. I think that if they were to finish just inside the playoffs, that for me would be about what I would expect them to achieve, because that's a squad where there's depth as well. It isn't, it's not a light squad as well. It's a squad that could cope with a few injuries. And they've got a manager in John Askey who is, I can't really speak highly enough of John in terms of the job that he did at Macclesfield for all those years in such a difficult situation, against the odds, very much against the odds, got them promoted. He's now gone and got York promoted as well. So they've got an excellent manager too behind the scenes, pulling the strings. So they'll be in and around the playoffs for me.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Seeing just the change in York. You look at the crowds have increased. They are a big city. Everyone's always said York, they're a side that, should be a lot higher. They should be a football league club. When you look at the size of the city, you look at them as a club, the history and stuff, and you look at the crowds and how positive this promotion has been so far this season for York. And the depth they've got will work in their favour, especially going into the winter months. And the signings are quite acute and quite interesting. And I think smart signings, for example, Michael Duckworth, obviously he was there the previous season, but you look at him when he was at Halifax, a very good wing back. The players they brought in, Fraser Kerr, what a signing he was from Chesterfield, and just very smart in my opinion with the signings for me. But I think that more or less does wrap up the interview. Adam, it's been a pleasure to bring you on to talk all things about the National League. I'd happily have you on again if you want to, in fact. But Adam, cheers for coming on.
You're welcome, and good luck with your podcast. It's great. It's great to see you pursuing that at such a young age. I'd always say, actually, to anyone with aspirations to get into broadcasting, the more experience that you can get, particularly on a microphone like you are right now, absolutely get as much of it as you can. So well done, and it's good to see you doing so well. So keep it going.